Sonda com IPTV, é isso?
Isso.
Aí já deve ter gente aí, que a Deliva falou assim, não, tem um monte de gente ligando aqui falando, cadê a transmissão? Eles podem sair do 20, eu acho, até 23, eu tô com muito esse número na cabeça. Eu tinha 3, eu tinha 4.
Então foi, né?
Foi, né? Aparentemente tá ok.
Já tá, melhor aqui. Você acessou isso aqui? Eu ia, mas acho que saiu.
Será que a gente não podia começar só para as pessoas saberem que...
Já tá.
Ah, já tá?
Só tá atualizado. É só não sei se não é que vai. Só não sei se não é.
Aqui não tá funcionando. Engraçado que não é onde tá acessando.
Aqui tá.
Mas eu sempre acessei aqui.
Os cabos lá, mas não tem. Aí os adaptadores tá lá na bolsinha de ar, a gente quis descer pra pegar. Vou tentar esse aqui. Quer testar? Acho que é melhor do que esse aí, né? Ela vai ficar meio aqui perto, não vai? Eu vou pôr aqui, ó. De frente. Tenta ver se pega legal, Ju. Tenta ver se pega legal, Ju. Tenta ver se pega legal.
escola de reabilitação na Faculdade de Medicina da Universidade de Montreal. Ela também é diretora do Laboratório de Incontinência e Envelhecimento do Centro de Pesquisa do Instituto Universitário de Geriatria de Montreal. E hoje ela vai falar sobre Conservative Management of Urinary Incontinence and Pelvic Organ Prolapse, Evidences from 2017. A palestra será em inglês, não terá tradução simultânea. Vocês podem, ao final da palestra, fazer perguntas. Se não se sentirem à vontade de fazer perguntas em inglês, podem fazer em português sem problema, que eu posso ajudá-los. Eu queria, já de início, agradecer muito a presença da professora Chantale, que se disponibilizou a estar aqui por 20 dias nessa agenda super ocupada dela. Então, ela aproveitou, quer dizer, está perdendo as férias dela estando aqui. Então, thank you very much for spending time with us instead of your holidays. It's a pleasure to have you here. Nós começamos essa parceria um ano atrás com a ida da minha doutoranda Alicia Cassiari, que ficou um ano com a professora Chantale lá em Montreal. E eu já queria agradecer a Amanda Morim, que organizou tudo isso pra gente, divulgou isso e todos os cartazes, enfim, que vocês conheceram, organização de toda essa transmissão das salas. Eu agradeço bastante a Amanda também. E aí, então a gente pode começar. As pessoas que estão na internet, se vocês quiserem mandar perguntas depois do final da palestra, vocês podem usar o meu e-mail. Meu e-mail é icnsaco@usp.br. Então, icnsaco@usp.br, a gente pode passar as perguntas para ela ao final. Eu vou acessando o meu e-mail ao longo da palestra. Tudo bem? Sim. Sejam muito bem-vindos. Quem são os alunos do curso do HC de Saúde da Mulher? E de Geriatria? Então, tá. Legal. Sejam bem-vindos. So thank you very much again. Now it's with you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. I would first like to thank Isabel and the university and also the funding agency that helped me come here. I will be speaking in English because unfortunately my Portuguese is not so good. I could speak in French, but I don't know if you guys are very good in French. Yes? No? Yeah. One person? Maybe we can talk after. Okay. So, yes, I've been very welcome to come here. It's really a pleasure, and I hope you will like this lecture. I will be talking to you about the evidence, and this is based on the international consultation on incontinence that just got out in June this year, so it's pretty new. So I will start. So I thought I would give a little bit about us because you probably know Canada for sure, and some of you Montreal. So Montreal is on the eastern part of Canada, and the population in Montreal is much less than the one that you have here in Sao Paulo. And 47% of the people are Canadian, French-Canadian born. So French, and then there was a lot of immigrants in Montreal, so it's really multicultural, and if one day you have the chance to come, please write to me, and it's going to be a pleasure to have you at the lab. It's really a nice city too. So what we have in Montreal, a little bit different than you, we have 4 seasons, and it goes, and really 4 seasons. It goes from +30 during the summer. It was our summer when I left. It was actually +30 when I left. And it can go in the winter, ask Licia. It can go to -30 and sometimes a little bit less than that, -35 sometimes. So we have the colors in the fall, we have the snow in the winter, of course, and the summer and the spring we have the flowers. University of Montreal School of Rehabilitation is the second largest school of rehabilitation in Canada. We have 30 professors, we have 115 physiotherapy students, and 120 occupational therapy students. So it's quite large. What we also have, which I'm quite proud of, is that we have the only postgraduate course, university-based, for physiotherapists who wants to get involved in pelvic floor rehabilitation. And every year we have 20 new physiotherapists that are trained evidence-based during 6 courses over 2.5 years to be able to do these treatments. So I think it's really exciting because part of my role is not only to do research in pelvic floor rehabilitation, but find the capacity to then transfer it to our community. And by teaching those physiotherapists, then we ensure that there's going to be a transfer of our research. So I'm also at the Research Center of Aging, and at that research center we have 52 researchers, 270 students, and 36 postdocs. And there's 2 major teams: neuroscience and aging, because as you know, Alzheimer's disease and all those diseases are very prevalent, so we have a big team looking into that. And we also have health promotion, care, and intervention, and that's where I am with the incontinence. This is our lab, the Incontinence and Aging Laboratory, and these are the rooms that we have and the activities that we do. So we go from measuring the pelvic floor dysfunction to the training and the exercise class, and even dancing with the participant. Is it okay? Am I speaking too fast? No? Is it loud enough?
Yes.
Good. You tell me if you don't understand. So I'll tell you a little bit about the goals of our lab before I start the evidence that I'm going to be presenting you today. But if you come next week, I'll be talking more about all the research that we do in our lab into all those objectives. So the main goals of my research chair, because I have a Canadian research chair, so 80% of my time at the university is taken to do research. And the goal is to improve the continence care in older women through a more targeted and effective treatment model. So what we want is for Canadian aging women, and I heard some of you are in geriatrics, so you will like that. And so what we want is give better service to those women, because right now there is not so much good service. It's not available widely, and it's costly. And we know that the population is aging, so, and I think in your country too, so eventually this is going to be something very important. So this is the primary goal. How do I do that? First, I want to better understand the problem. And to do that, we ask the ladies. So we do citizen jury studies. We also look at the evidence. And to look at the evidence, we're involved in Cochrane reviews. You probably know Cochrane reviews. I'm going to be presenting on that also. And I'm actually doing one with Licia right now. And we also look at the pathophysiology of incontinence. That's why we look at the muscle. That's why we have ultrasound and MRI measurements. With knowing better what's happening, then we have another objective, which is to build cost-effective treatment and improve the adherence of those treatments. And so that's why we have randomized trial that we're running in Montreal, and that's why also we're studying strategies to improve adherence in women. Then another way, we want to better predict which are the best patients, which are the best women to do pelvic floor rehabilitation. Because in some women it works, as you know, some of you are doing pelvic floor rehabilitation. Most of the women it works, but in some it doesn't really work. And maybe it would be more cost effective to send them directly to the urogyne for a surgery if pelvic floor muscle training is not effective. Maybe in some, group exercise is enough. Maybe in others, one-on-one therapy is better. So we are doing right now a large prediction model to be able to better screen the patient and send them to the right intervention. And finally, better implement. So we have a lot of tools that we make, books, booklets, DVDs. We're working on an application, and we're doing the course for the physiotherapists in order to improve the implementation, the transfer of all the knowledge that we got. So these are the goal of the Canadian Research Chair. Next week I'm going to have 2 conferences on that, 2 days conference on that. So now we're going to focus more on the evidence. And I was very lucky in the last 4 years to be able to chair Chapter 12 of the ICI, or the International Consultation on Incontinence book. For those of you who want to take a look at this book, you can go on the International Continence Society website, and you're able to go and I think maybe download the book, or you have to, I don't know if you have to pay. I'm a member, so I don't have to pay. I don't know if you are a non-member, but actually you can have the information over there. This is quite good information because this is the last evidence, the up-to-date evidence on incontinence and management, incontinence and prolapse for women and incontinence in men. So, like I said, I was lucky to be leading the authors of that chapter, and today I will be presenting you those evidence. So, the International Consultation Incontinence book was created in partnership with the International Conference on Urological Disease, and this is with the World Health Organization. It is updated every 4 years by a group of researchers and clinicians. This year it had 2 books with 23 chapters. It's really, really big. It's about that big. It's like a dictionary, actually. It includes over 200 contributors over the world, and it's a key reference text to refer for clinical practice, because you will get information about what are the best evidence for your practice. It's a good idea to look into that, but also when planning future research to know where the gaps are. And also I would tell you that government, when they make decision about payment of certain service, they often look into that book. So it's quite an important book. And I don't know if you can find me in the picture. I was lucky I was in the front. Okay, so these were all the chapter chair or important people in doing this consultation. So, like I said, I was in charge of the conservative management. And what I will be talking to you today is define for you the conservative management, give you the different types of management, talk to you about level of evidence and grade of recommendation. How do we find level of evidence? How do we say that this is a grade A or a grade B? And after that, I will give you the results. I will give you the result of effectiveness for prevention and treatment, either for incontinence in women, incontinence in men, or pelvic prolapse in women. Okay, you're still okay? Okay. So what is conservative management? Conservative management is the principal form of management at primary care level. It's usually described as a simple intervention and low cost. It does not prejudice subsequent treatment option. It is low risk of adverse event. It's used with minor to moderate symptoms or when treatment are appropriate or undesired. And it is not a medication or a surgery. Okay? So this would be the definition of conservative management. Now there's different type of conservative management. First, there's lifestyle modification intervention. And when we're talking about incontinence and prolapse, that could be weight reduction. That could be liquid modification, the kind of liquid, if you're drinking coffee, the amount of coffee, the amount of water you're drinking. Then there's pelvic floor muscle training that most of you know about, either alone or in combination with biofeedback, in combination of abdominal muscle exercise, in combination of yoga, in combination of different things. Then there's other modalities like cones, electrical stimulation, magnetic stimulation, posterior tibial nerve stimulation. Those I will explain when we get there. This time, it was the first time we were talking about posterior tibial nerve stimulation. There was actually a lot of new studies about that modality, and many of those from Brazil. Yay! So I think it's good. Schedule voiding regimen, the calendar, the bladder diary. Other complementary and alternative medicine. There's some acupuncture treatment. There is mindfulness now. There is all those things that are a little bit outside that we looked into also. And finally, there's ring and pessaries for prolapse. So these are all the conservative management, and today I'm going to present you the result for most of them. So how do we do that? How do we come with level of evidence and a grade of recommendation? First, we have to do a literature search. And we were very fortunate to have in our group Sheila Wallace from the Cochrane group, who was able to get for us all the new literature, all the literature on all those modalities that I talked to you about, the conservative modalities. So what did she do? She searched into the register of ongoing trials just to make sure that some of those trials maybe were finished and we would get, the last trial on those different modalities. She also searched electronic bibliographic database like Embase, Medline, CINAHL, those database. She searched specialized journal and conference proceeding. So that could be the International Continence Society meeting, or all those meetings that are about urology or urogynecology. Citation tracking was also done, and finally search of reference lists. So as you can see, there's a lot of work behind that. Sheila usually does the first part, and then she sends us the authors a list of potential abstracts, potential papers. So by reading the title and looking at the methodology, we decide if we put that in or not. So as you can see, a lot of work to get all the literature on these interventions. And that's the basic of having good evidence, is that you really have to look everywhere. Then we look at the quality of the trials. And of course, we want to have randomized trials, but there's also cohort studies. There's some modalities that there has not been a lot of studies on. So we need to get everything. If it is a randomized trial, we will look at the quality of the trial. And you're probably familiar with the concert statement. Are you? Yeah? So if you're not, this is quite interesting because it tells you what you should have. When you do a randomized control trial, these are the elements that you should put in your abstract and in your papers. And that would ensure a good validity of the trial. And if you don't have that, well, maybe the trial is good also, but it's difficult for the evaluator to have a comment on that. So actually, when you're the author, you're responsible for that. So with the concert statement, we were able to have a good impression about the quality. This is the end of it, so it's quite long, but it gives you a lot of things to look at. To have a good idea about the validity of the study. Then we look at the risk of bias. And risk of bias, this is the tool that we use at Cochrane, and we use that also for the ICI book, is all those trials we look for different bias that could make that trial not valid. So we will look at, for example, sequence generation. If it was a randomized trial, was it really randomized and randomized properly? And then we will evaluate that and say if there was a low risk, an unclear risk, or an high risk. And we have all the example of what could happen. And let's say somebody just pick up the dates. And one person on the Tuesday, one person was going in one group, and the Wednesday in the other group. This is not randomized. So then it would be a high risk. If somebody was using a computer-based randomized table, then it would be low risk. So there is example there, and you can actually assess different components of the trial to ensure this is a valid trial. Here you can see for the trials are on the top, and you can see that for 4 risk of bias, like random sequence generation, allocation, concealment, incomplete outcome data, blinding, and baseline comparability, we have either high risk, which is red, yellow, which is unknown risk, and blue, which is low risk. And then for each trial, you can say, okay, the study by Bow in 1999 was quite a good study on pelvic floor muscle training because the risk of bias is pretty low. Okay? And that will count when we will do our level of evidence. So I get to the level of evidence. Level of evidence 1 is usually involves either a meta-analysis of trials. So when there is many trials on one subject, let's say pelvic floor muscle training, and they were able, because the trial were similar, they were able to put them together and to do a statistical analysis, which is named meta-analysis, that is able to put the result together to strengthen even the quality of the knowledge we have about those trials. So if there was a meta-analysis, then it's level 1. If there is good quality randomized trials, it can be also level 1. Level 2 include lower quality randomized trial. And see, that's why we do the concert, and that's why we do the risk of bias, because the lower quality trial never get to the level 1. So if you have small trials, if you have trials where there's no blinding, then you will get a level 2. It will be difficult to get a level 1. Is that, you understand that? If there is meta-analysis with not good homogeneity or poor quality prospective cohort study, you will get also a level 2. So cohort studies that are following one participant, not one, but many participants, not randomized, will get to the level 2. Level 3 includes good quality retrospective study, case control, or good quality case series. So the level of those trials are even lower than randomized cohort. You see, you're going lower, and that's why your level of evidence is lower. And finally, level 4 evidence includes expert opinion. You're all experts, so you can give your opinion. Unfortunately, it's not as good as a randomized trial. Be careful when people are saying, in my opinion. Expert or bench research, or bench research, which would be more like explaining how it works, but there has not actually been any randomized trial or trial with subjects in it. So that would be level 4. Okay? And we should base as much as possible our practice on level 1 and 2. If we are able, if there is evidence, we should base our practice on level 1. And if not so much, level 1 and 2. Okay? Now, grades. Now that we have those evidence, we have to make grades out of that. So grade A recommendation is the best grade. And it depends on consistent level 1 evidence. And I underline consistent because it means that if you have only one trial, even if it was a great trial about the modality, but there's only one, it will not be grade A yet. It might be grade B, but if other people support your findings, and it's important that not only one person does a good randomized trial, if it's supported by others, then it will reach grade A. Okay? So consistent level 1 evidence, and it means that the recommendation is effectively mandatory and placed within a clinical care pathway. So that means that our government, that means that our health, how do you say that? Health insurance should encourage those treatments to be given because there's grade A recommendation. So it's really high level of evidence. On occasion, level 1 evidence does not lead to grade A. So sometimes, even if there is a couple of good trials or a meta-analysis level 1, it does not necessarily lead to grade A if the therapy is very expensive, if it's dangerous or unethical. Okay, so grade A will consider that too. And grade A recommendation can follow from level 2 evidence. However, grade A recommendation needs a greater body of evidence if based of anything except level A. So if you have a treatment that is really not costly, the trials are not so good. They're more level 2. What can I say? Maybe the bladder diary. It will not hurt anyone. There's not so many good trials, but it's easy to implement with the patient. So that could reach a grade A, even if the level of evidence are a little bit lower. Do you understand that? So this can be played a little bit up and down depending of the cost, the danger around the modality. Grade B now, recommendation. Grade B depends on an individual level 1 study. So if you have one good trial, but it's only the first one in that area, and it's really good, it's really valid, you would get a grade B. Or if you have consistent level 3 or level 3 studies, or if you have the majority, because sometimes you have majority of evidence supporting something, but a few trials not supporting it. Now, when a few trials are not supporting it, you're going to see later that sometimes we consider it and we change the grade, but other times we look more into those trials and try to explain why. And if there's a valid reason why those trials are not supporting the rest, then it might go to a grade A. So it's all dependent on the strength and the validity of those trials. So that's why, like I said before, the risk of bias and the validity of those trials is really important. Grade C, it depends on level 4 studies or majority of evidence of 2 and level 3, or even Delphi process of expert opinion. And grade D, unfortunately, that means that there's no recommendation possible. So that's very low. So you should never base your practice on grade D. So grade A, grade B, level 1, level 2. That's what we should do. Okay? And again, look at expert opinion. It's not there. Okay? Okay, so now let's look at the results. Now that you're very knowledgeable in risk of bias, you're knowledgeable in level of evidence and grade of recommendation, I will give you the results. So the question is, are lifestyle intervention effective in the prevention or treatment of incontinence in women and men? And here, what do you have? You have exercise, you have smoking, you have drinking, you have overweight people. Okay. So the level of evidence and grade of recommendation have not changed in this. I put 2016 there. This is because I actually presented those results at ICS Tokyo in the fall of 2016. So that's why I have it there. The book got out in 2017, but we finished our things in 2016. So that's why the confusion in the numbers. So in 2013, for weight loss, we had level 1 evidence and grade A. So it was recommended to lose weight, and that could improve continence. In 2016, there was 2 more randomized trials, 1 in men, 1 in women, and there was a big meta-analysis. So this is unchanged. We still have grade A evidence and level 1. And in obese and overweight women, a weight loss of 5% of initial body weight has an impact on the reduction of incontinence symptoms. And the odds of developing incontinence 1 year after treatment can be reduced by 3% for every kilogram lost. Now, if we look at dietary modification, reduction of fluid intake, there's evidence level 2 and grade B. There has been no new randomized trial on dietary modification, and the recommendation remains. So a reduction of 25% from baseline can help reduce the incontinence, and that is provided that the person will drink no less than 30 milliliter by a kilogram. Now, caffeine consumption, there's evidence level 2, grade B. So a reduction in 200 milligram or 2 cups a day will improve continence. So I don't know if you're drinking more than 2 cups a day. Yes. If you're not incontinent, it's okay, but yeah, you're drinking a Brazilian coffee. I understand. Smoking abstinence. There was 1 randomized trial showing that the reduction of incontinence frequency with smoking abstinence, and the evidence is level 3, grade C. And it's level 3, although I told you that usually a randomized trial is level 2. This time it was a very small randomized trial, so that's why the quality of the trial didn't get to a level 2. For men, We did not provide any recommendation for men in 2013 chapter. So this is all new recommendation. And this is based on one single trial that is new. And this was for weight loss. There's evidence level 2 and grade B. And this is in men who are overweight or obese. Sorry, I just have to move my, okay. For caffeine, there was a new epidemiologic study, a cross-sectional study. So that's why we have a level 3, because it's a cross-sectional study and it's new. 2 cups of coffee a day seems to help. Smoking abstinence, again, that small trial with men and women showing level of evidence 3 and grade C. So all simple things that your patient can do to help their incontinence, men and women. Now, if we get to pelvic floor muscle training, is pelvic floor muscle training effective in the prevention or the treatment of incontinence? So if we look at primary prevention, so this is for women that don't have incontinence. So these are women that are mostly primiparous, and they didn't have incontinence prior to their pregnancy. There were actually 9 trials that were found for a large number of participants. And what we found was that continent women who began pelvic floor muscle training from around the 20th week of pregnancy were significantly less likely to report incontinence, either in late pregnancy, so after 34 weeks, and this was by 56% less. They were incontinent up to 12-week postpartum, 50% less, and in mid-postpartum, 30% less. So as you can see, it reduces, because probably for those who didn't do the exercise, some natural healing will come and some of them will not be incontinent anymore. What we found that's interest for you is that there was a dose effect. In the trials that were more intensive and more supervised, we had a better effect of treatment. So this is important to keep in mind when you treat patients, that there's a need for supervision and intensity in the treatment. Most trials were in primiparous women, so we cannot really generalize to multiparous women. And it was difficult to see a long-term effect. There was a couple of studies looking at long-term effect, and the results were different. And it's actually very difficult to look at long-term effect when it's a first baby, because there's gonna be other events. There's gonna be another pregnancy, and that will bias the result in the long term. So that was a limit of this. There was also very interesting, what we did was we looked at obstruction for labor, because some women are saying, maybe I shouldn't do my pelvic floor exercise during pregnancy as prevention, because that might make it more difficult for me to have a baby. That might obstruct my labor. So what we found in those studies, that there was no effect of PFMT on labor and newborn outcome in one randomized trial, looked at that. Another one, there was a reduction of the episiotomy rate and the length of the second stage, actually, with the pelvic floor group. And that author explained that it was probably because the women were not only able to contract better, but also to relax better during delivery. Pelvic floor muscle training before and during pregnancy doesn't seem to affect labor or birth outcome or complication rates, and this was seen also in a large cohort study by both. So it's safe to do during pregnancy, and as you can see, the level of evidence is 1 and the grade of recommendation is 8. So in our practice, we should encourage women to do those pelvic floor exercise starting at 20 weeks. Now, PFMT for mixed prevention and treatment of incontinence in childbearing women. So we're looking now at a different population. These are women either primiparous or multiparous. These are women that can either have or not incontinence. We found 13 trials like that. And the exercise were starting at 16 to 20 weeks gestation, and they were reducing risk of incontinence in 7 of 9 studies in late pregnancy, and 2 others in early and late postpartum. What we found was that there was 2 trials, and 2 very recent trials, that didn't give the same results. We found a trial by Bow in 2011 with a large number of participants, and another one in 2015 by Fritel with 282 participants, which didn't show any difference between the group that did pelvic floor muscle training and the group that didn't do. And unfortunately, because of that, you wonder, will we change the grade of recommendation and the level of evidence? So this is an example why we didn't change it. So here, instruction in the Bow study, there was no individual instruction on pelvic floor muscle contraction. So it was not taught by digital palpation. And many of you must know, if you are practicing pelvic floor rehabilitation, that it's difficult to contract, especially if you have never done that before. And trials actually, I think it's by Bum, has shown that if you ask somebody to contract their pelvic floor, 40% of those people will do a Valsalva. So this is completely contrary, and if you do Valsalva for 3 months, this is not going to help your incontinence or prevent your incontinence. Also, those treatments were done into an aerobic context. It was trainers in a gym that were doing that. That's why actually there was no individual instruction. And then it was a group, an aerobic group, in which there was a small component of pelvic floor muscle training. Adherence was very low. 40% of the people in the treatment group attended to 80% of the aerobic classes. So although that trial didn't show a difference between exercise, pelvic floor exercise, and no pelvic floor exercise, you can see that we cannot consider it as a high level of evidence. There is bias there that could have influenced those results. The second trial by Fritel was a trial in 2015. The treat was no specific instruction on the number of or intensity of the contraction. So actually what it was a pragmatic study in which the women were treated by their therapist the way the therapist was treating usually. So that was not standardized. So you could have very different treatment for those ladies. Adherence, 69% of the participants in the pelvic floor muscle training group attended 8 of the 12 interventions. So only 70% or a little bit less attended 8 sessions. So 30% did not. And there was possible contamination with 54% in the intervention group and 63% in the control group doing their exercise at home, postnatal pelvic floor muscle training at home. So you're in France, this was in France, and I don't know if you know, in France, it has been given, women have been doing their pelvic floor exercise free of cost by health insurance since 1985. So when you get in a randomized trial like that, and women have been doing it for so long, it's possible to get a bias like that, which is that even if they were not randomized in that group that were receiving it, there were actually 63% doing it. So I don't know if you can see with this example, but again, this is not a trial that is strong enough to contradict what we had with the other trials. Do you get that? Yeah? Okay. So in conclusion, there was a problem with dose effect in those two trials. Intensive, the individually taught and intensive. And there was also a problem with adherence. And with these results and the other 9 that we saw before, we have level of evidence 2, because this is big trials. So we reduced the level of evidence because this is actually big trials, but we kept the grade A because of the majority supporting it, and the fact that it was not something that was dangerous for the participant. Okay? So that's an example how we manage those level of evidence, those risk of bias, and the quality of the trials. For perinatal, for postpartum treatment, there was not so many new studies, 2 new studies, and the level of evidence was already level 1, grade A, and those new trials were not controversial. So we have grade A, level 1, and pelvic floor muscle training should be offered as first-line conservative therapy to women with persistent incontinence symptoms 3 months after delivery. Okay, so we looked at the prenatal and postnatal women, and as you can see, the level of evidence and grades are quite high. Now we will look at women in general with pelvic floor muscle training. Is it effective in prevention and treatment? So we were quite happy to see that there was a new randomized trial that we could report on, and it was in older women. So therefore we have level of evidence 2 and grade of recommendation C for prevention of incontinence in aging women. So these are women that don't have incontinence. You look at the prevalence before, the prevalence after the intervention, after 6 months, and you see that in the group of aging women that didn't do those exercises, the prevalence is increased. For treatment, the level of evidence was high. The level of evidence was 1, and grade of recommendation was A, and it is unchanged. There was new trials, and mainly what we found was that benefit are shown across age cohorts, because there were trials in younger women, trials in older women, trials in different type of incontinence. So the pelvic floor muscle training appears to be effective for stress, mixed, and urgent incontinence in various cultural contexts, using several different training regimens, including mobile technology. There was one trial with an app for the first time in our review, so that was quite exciting, and assessed by multiple outcome measures, so patient-reported outcome or clinical outcome. So really, pelvic floor muscle training seems to be very effective in reducing incontinence in women in general. So again, this should be part of your clinical practice. What was the most effective pelvic floor muscle training program? What we did was we looked at 12 variations of pelvic floor muscle training comparison. It could be either with supervision, without supervision, with pelvic floor muscle training, with yoga, pelvic floor muscle training, or without, pelvic floor muscle training with transverse abdominis, pelvic floor muscle training with hypopressive, pelvic floor muscle training with and without, different modalities. So we have 12 of them. And what we found was that health professional thought and supervised PFMT was more effective than self-directed. Again, the supervision seemed to be important. no clear benefit was found of adding other modalities to pelvic floor muscle training. So we didn't find strong evidence to say that adding yoga, adding hyperpressive, adding transverse to pelvic floor muscle training was more effective than pelvic floor muscle training. And also there was no clear benefit of adding clinic or home-based biofeedback to pelvic floor muscle program. What we recommend is that the clinician does an evaluation of the patient, and if the patient seems not to understand the treatment and seems to need biofeedback, then they should proceed to biofeedback. But there was no evidence for all patients that it's needed. For men, PFMT, pre-operative or immediate post-operative PFMT instruction for men undergoing radical prostatectomy was seen to be helpful in early continence recovery. And here I say level 2, grade B. It was clarified because there was a very large trial showing that the effect in the long term was not so important, but in the short term it was. So we modified our sentence saying that it was helpful in early continence recovery. So patient will recover more rapidly if they do their exercise. In men with persistent post-prostatectomy incontinence, it is unclear if digital rectal examination or biofeedback offer benefit over verbal instruction. And here what we suggest is, again, if the patient doesn't understand the movement, then it's a one-on-one decision with the participant to do or not biofeedback. For men, again, there was no benefit of adding electrical stimulation to pelvic floor muscle training, level 2, grade B. The use of biofeedback to assist pelvic floor muscle training is a physiotherapist patient decision based on economic and preference, as I said before. And finally, the use of a strong pelvic floor muscle contraction immediately after voiding or urethral massage to empty the urethra can improve the symptoms of post-maturation dribble. So there's level 2 and grade B. Do I still have time? Yeah? 15 minutes?
Yeah, because we were a bit late.
Oh, okay.
To begin.
Okay. Are you still okay? Nobody sleeping? Okay. Now I'm going to talk to you about modalities, different modalities to help train the pelvic floor. So the cones, the vaginal cones, the electrical stimulation, magnetic stimulation, and transcutaneous nerve stimulation. So we're going to ask, are they effective in treating incontinence? There was no studies on prevention, but on treating incontinence. So vaginal cones, for those of you who are not familiar with vaginal cones, these cones are like little eggs, little tampons that are placed inside the vagina, higher than the pelvic floor muscle. So it's like a weight, and the patient needs to contract their pelvic floor either to keep it, so a small contraction and maintain it for a long time, or they can do also their exercise with the cone. So it gives them a resistance. It's a resistance exercise. So we have level 2 evidence and grade B because we have small trials on the vaginal cones. So what we know is that vaginal cone versus no treatment, it is effective as a first-line therapy when used with supervision by a trained healthcare professional. And this is quite important because we saw different things. In the trials where there was no supervision, when the woman goes and buy the cone at the pharmacy or in the store, it doesn't do as well as when the woman does it with the therapist that teaches how to do the contraction with the cones. Pelvic floor muscle training versus cone with healthcare health professional supervision, they have similar effect. Vaginal cone plus pelvic floor muscle training, there's no added effect of over pelvic floor muscle alone. Now, should you change your practice and give vaginal cone rather than pelvic floor muscle training, they seem to have the similar effect, but if you look at those trials more closely, you will see that vaginal cones are not fit for everyone. These are weights. So in patients that are really weak, you can understand that the cone's going to go with gravity down on the floor. It's not going to stay in place. In some women, it's not comfortable. In some women, it's the introitus is too small and it's going to be painful. So although they seem to have similar effect, their grade of recommendation is B, not A, because of those aspects. Electrical stimulation. What is electrical stimulation? It is usually a probe that is inserted in the vagina or in the rectum, and on that probe there are electrodes that will send electrical current to make the muscle contract. So here there is evidence, level 2, grade B. E-stim may be more effective than no treatment for improvement. We have seen in those trials that were done on electrical stimulation that the current made by those machines seem to help, but don't seem to be able to cure. So this is something to take into consideration. For stress incontinence, maximal clinic-based E-stim may be more effective than low-intensity home-based E-stim. So when you do it during the clinic in supervision with the therapist, usually you can use higher level of current. It seems to be better than home units. For urgent incontinence and overactive bladder, medical treatment appears to be more effective than electrical stimulation. And for stress and mixed incontinence, E-stim plus PFMT do not add any benefit over PFMT. So this doesn't appear to be such an interesting modality, and unfortunately you cannot have electrical stimulation and not do exercise on your own. I think if it was like that, nobody would be going to the gym anymore. And it's the same for the pelvic floor. Okay, so it can help a little bit for muscles that probably are more atrophied, but it doesn't appear to cure the incontinence. Magnetic stimulation, so this is a chair in which there is a magnetic stimulation that will stimulate the pelvic floor and make it contract. Evidence level 2, so there has been some randomized trials, small ones, but the grade is C because these are not very good trials. So M-still plus PFMT doesn't add benefit over pelvic floor muscle training. And for all incontinence, there is unclear benefit of magnetic stimulation over no treatment or other active treatment. And it also is unclear if one type of M-still is better than the other one. So as you can see, we are lacking research into that area, a little bit like electrical stimulation, and these don't seem to be the best modalities for your practice. Posterior tibial nerve stimulation, the new one with a lot of trials in Brazil. Okay, so it was new for us to review that. We had 2 authors to review because there was many trials, and it seemed to be very in trend to do trials on that. So there was evidence level 1, so there were good trials, and grade of recommendation B because it's starting. They were small, although they were good trials, they were small trials, they were new, so we didn't get to the grade A yet. So PTNS is better than no treatment or sham for improving urgent continence. And what we said was that it should be offered to adults with urgent continence who do not achieve satisfactory result from the first line treatment that we know already, so pelvic floor muscle training. If it doesn't work with pelvic floor muscle training, and you will see later with bladder diary, then we could move to this modality. Level 2 grade B, one new trial, percutaneous PTNS may be perceived to be as effective as tolterodine for urgency incontinence with an improved side effect profile. So it's interesting because it could be as good as the medication, but it doesn't have the side effect as the medication. At least weekly PTNS sessions should be offered during an active treatment. So 1 week treatment versus less than 1 week treatment were compared, and the evidence was supporting that patients should have at least one treatment. Okay, so I think it's very interesting because this is probably a modality that will expand in the next chapter that we will have. So a lot of interest around that modality. Is bladder training effective in treatment of incontinence? Bladder training, the bladder diary. There have been studies over the years on that, not so much recently, however. There's level 1 evidence, grade A. In the past, there was some study. It is appropriate as a first-line therapy, although the randomized trial are small, but because it doesn't have so much side effect, it is still a grade A. For stress and mixed incontinence, bladder training plus pelvic floor muscle training might be better than pelvic floor muscle training alone in the short term. That's for stress and mixed incontinence. Bladder training is effective at improving urinary frequency and nocturia, and bladder training plus drug may be better than drug therapy for frequency, but not for incontinence in those patients. So I think this is interesting, grade A and grade B. Grade A mostly for urgent continence and all incontinence, and grade B for stress and mixed incontinence. With the bladder diary, a simple tool, but with low risk. Now to close, I would like to talk a little bit about the prolapse. I don't know if many of you are familiar with the prolapse. The prolapse of the organs, you can see a cystocele there. You can see a prolapse of the bladder. This is when there's the descent either of the bladder, the vagina, or the rectum. Okay, so if we look, again, we had the same modalities for prolapse. We had lifestyle modification intervention. There are only few evidence, and that's why we have grade C. We have level 3 evidence from a cohort study, not randomized trial, showing that constipation seems to be associated with prolapse. Smoking doesn't seem to be related to the development of prolapse, and there's an association. The association between occupation, physical activity, and body weight and prolapse is conflicting, so we don't have recommendation. However, this is a new area of research, and we recommend people to do more research into that because these are simple interventions, and we need to have more evidence. See, the absence of evidence doesn't mean that it's not good. The absence of evidence just means that there was not enough trial looking into that. Okay? So that's also something that is important for you to understand. Pelvic floor muscle training, there's level 1 evidence. Pelvic floor muscle training intervention delivered 12 years after childbirth can prevent the symptoms of prolapse, which develop in the longer term. So that's quite interesting as a prevention, and it's a grade B, and it's a level 1 because it's a grade B because there's only one trial and it's new. So a good prevention trial. Pelvic floor muscle training can help improve the POP symptoms. Again, grade B. There were 7 trials showing that pelvic floor muscle training could improve prolapse, but only a few of them using outcome looking at the weight of the prolapse. A lot of outcome in those trials of treatment were using outcome such as incontinence related to the POP, such as discomfort related to the POP. So because it was not only POP symptoms, that's why even if we had 7 trials, we could go to a grade A. So we still need more trial in that area. And finally, perioperative pelvic floor muscle training does not seem to help improve POP symptoms in women undergoing surgery of the vault of the POP. So those are more important or severe prolapse. They don't seem to benefit from the PFMT exercise. So, I'm coming to the end. This is quite exciting because we have had, like, for prolapse and for posterior tibial nerve stimulation, for also pelvic floor muscle training, we have had a lot of new research that have influenced our level of evidence or grade of recommendation. But as you were able to see, there's still a lot of work to do. There's still more evidence that needs to come. There's still more research that needs to be done. And for those who are going to do the next research that will help in our future recommendation, we encourage people to use standardized terminology on conservative management, to report if they were teaching, if they were supervising, to report adherence, and to try to use programs that are high dose, because we already know that we need to have supervised and we need to have high dose treatment. There's no reason to do a small trial with unsupervised intervention, because we already know that it doesn't work as well. Compare the new methods with the best available data. Don't compare the new method with a treatment that is not optimal if you really want to see if your new method is efficient. Use a power calculation and to have enough numbers. And if you're going to be having a big number, go with a good intervention. Sometimes we have small numbers with a very adequate intervention. Sometimes we have large numbers with a very small intervention unsupervised. So try to have the adequate number with enough supervision. Identify the potential predictors of positive outcome. And finally, it's important to do longer-term follow-up to see if these interventions are good in the short term, immediately after the treatment, but most importantly, if they are effective 1 year after, 6 months, 2 years after. Because if we want to recommend those in change of practice, they need to be efficient in the long term. So in conclusion, there's an overall increasing evidence to support conservative management as first-line treatment for incontinence in men and women, and for POP. Yay! Large, well-designed trial with longer-term follow-up are needed for prevention and treatment. And I would like to acknowledge the people who helped me in the chapter, Yvonne Ruella from University of Montreal, and Pauline Campbell from Glasgow, Caledonia University. All the authors that you saw at the beginning of the presentation who did all that work with me, and Catherine Moore was the lead of the past chapter from which we started our thing. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Chantale, for your great class, great keynote. Agora a gente está aberto para perguntas. Não fiquem com vergonha. Pode fazer pergunta em português, não tem problema, a gente passa para ela. Ou vocês arriscam em inglês, porque ninguém aqui sabe falar, ninguém é nativo aqui em inglês, né? Então todo mundo perdoado. E quem está assistindo também pela TV USP, se quiser mandar por e-mail, vou repetir, meu e-mail é icnsaco@usp.br. Eu acesso e eu faço a pergunta para a professora Chantale. Aliás, eu queria agradecer que a gente tem mais ou menos 200 pessoas online, então isso foi um sucesso, né? 200 people are online.
Oh, good. Hello, hello.
Quem quer começar?
It's known that low estrogen levels is correlated with loss of muscle force. Is there any correlation with urinary incontinence and estrogen levels?
Could you introduce yourself first,
Oh,
please?
sorry.
Your name and where you're from?
Yes, I'm a PhD student from University of São Paulo.
Okay.
My name is Rodrigo.
So your question was if there was a correlation between lower force in the pelvic floor and hormonal changes,
Yes.
like after menopause. Yeah. Actually, probably, because we know. I say probably because we know that the prevalence increases with age, and we know that the prevalence increases around menopause. I don't know if there was a study, Lisa, do you know? I don't know if there was a study looking into premenopause, postmenopause women specifically, and correlating that to the level of estrogen. I don't know of any studies like that, but what we know is as there's a decline in force with age, this could also be related to sarcopenia, loss in muscle mass with age. But why I say that's probably is that hormones have been given to women for incontinence post-menopause. It is a little bit controversial because some studies have shown that it improves their incontinence and other not so much. So I'm sorry, I don't have a clear answer, but this is a great study after your doctorate, maybe.
Alguém mais?
I have a question from Alice.
Yeah.
She's asking if for the electrostimulation, is there any evidence showing specifically for those patients that have lower force grades, if they have more benefits receiving electrostimulation therapy?
There is none, actually, and I think in electrical stimulation, this is where research should go. Research should go in a specific clientele and see if those, let's say, those who have a avulsion injury, those who have very weak pelvic floor, is that helping them? If you take a large population with different patients, with patients that are weaker, patients that can already contract their pelvic floor, it doesn't seem to be better than pelvic floor muscle training, the addition. But it hasn't been done, and it should be done, I think, because this is mechanistically, this is what we done in rehabilitation, what we do. If a patient go out of a cast and has atrophy in the muscle, we will do electrical stimulation first. So it would make sense, but unfortunately in those subpopulation, from what I know, it has not been done. However, I'm thinking when I'm speaking, in population like MS patient, in some population where there is known stroke patient, when there's a known reduced strength, it seems to have been helpful. But again, I think we need more studies in those populations.
We have one question from Professor Simone Botelho. She's from
Okay.
the University, Federal University of Alfenas.
Okay.
She prepared a whole room with the students.
good.
They're watching you.
Okay.
They want to know what do you recommend as a training for the pelvic floor muscles for women with hyperactive bladder? I don't know what to say that. Hyperactive.
So is it those with urgency incontinence?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So urgency incontinence related to the hyperactive bladder. I would have to go back and see the trials that were, because I don't remember everything by heart, but I would say first supervised. They need to be supervised. And they need to be taught either by digital evaluation or by an instrument. So that's specific. And then the protocol needs to take into consideration the difficulties, the dysfunction of the muscle. So what we have seen in the past in patients with different type of incontinence is that it's not only strength that is a problem, but also rapidity of contraction, also endurance. So these are things that should be done in the protocol of treatment. So strengthening exercise, endurance, rapidity, a progressive program would be important also, because it has been shown that when you increase muscle, you always have to, overload the muscle. So it's important to increase the resistance, increase the difficulty. And of course, from what I said before, the bladder diary will be very important in those women to help monitor also the frequency of their menstruation, all the tips and tricks that can be given to them in order to manage their urgency. So the rapid contraction and the sustained contraction that can be done for that. The imaging, all that is done usually with the bladder diary.
Thank you.
Yeah.
About my name is Claudia Nakar.
Yeah.
I'm from Hospital das Clínicas.
Okay.
I'd like to know about the adherence of bladder diary. Your
In my experience,
yes, because in our experience, I think I should talk in my experience because I don't know your experience, but as soon as I know, as far as I know, bladder diary has no good adherence.
that depends. I would say there's different things. It has been shown that 3-day bladder diary, the 3-day bladder diary is as good as the 7-day, and usually the 3-day you have more adherence to it. In my experience, I'm very lucky because I work with aging women. Those of you who are in geriatrics, you know that aging patient, they want to please you, they want to be nice with you, so they fill all their diary. In younger patients, it's more difficult, but I think it's for you to tell them that this is a very important tool for their treatment. So I think it goes with the adherence and all the strategies that you can use to convince them that it's an important part of their treatment, and they can actually see the progress on that diary. And I think that if we use those strategies, then the bladder diary is much more adhered to. than if we don't. Yeah.
Yes, because in Brazil we have a problem in public services.
Okay.
That a lot of patients do not understand
Why they're doing it.
why and how to do it.
Yeah.
Even if we have a lot of
Figures. I think you really need to keep it simple. This is beyond the evidence, but I think that when you see the patient, you really need to see where the patient is. And if you want them to change behavior, either do exercise, do bladder diary, then you want to make sure that we say they're self-efficient, so they know enough to understand so that they will change that behavior, and they believe that that behavior will help them. So in order to have both of those, to have self-efficacy, we have to convince them. And that can be somebody who has different scholarity level, and we need to adapt to them. And that might take more time in some patient and less time in somebody who's more knowledgeable. But if we don't do that, it's very difficult to get the adherence. So a lot of teaching about that. Yeah.
There is another question from
Okay.
the Federal University.
Oh, so they're over there.
Minas Gerais. Okay.
They're-
Yeah, they are there.
Because I was looking at you.
Yeah, but because it's weird
It's
to look
weird.
at it.
I know,
Yeah.
it's weird.
I'll be there. That's what I mean. So they are asking about the parameters that you use for electrical stimulation for the urgent incontinence.
Okay. Well, this is a good question, but at the same time, what we did in the chapter was to put together all the studies on electrical stimulation for either urgency or for stress incontinence or mixed incontinence. And I would say that from what I've seen, this is very unfortunate, but there is a lot of everything. Unfortunately, for electrical stimulation, I think why the evidence are not so good is because the trials are not well done. Many of the, not all the trials, but many are using different parameters, and some of the parameters that we know that would not be effective, would not be high enough to have an impact. So unfortunately, from what we have, and to show those low level of evidence, it's because there's many parameters. What comes up more often, I could say, is for urgency incontinence, the low parameters. So something around 10 hertz, if this is what she's meaning in terms of hertz, this is what is recommended. But again, not recommended, but this is what I see most often. But I think that people who do research in electrical stimulation, they really should go and look at the recommendation from the electrical stimulation in general. They should write about what all the parameters that they are using. They should go back to electrotherapy that they learn at university and make sure that they're applying what should be done, because there is a lot of everything, and that's why we don't have so much good evidence in electrotherapy. And I really believe, like you were saying, that for some patients that are really weak and don't understand the contraction, doing electrical stimulation on the pelvic floor, they will say, oh, that's how I'm supposed to contract, and that will help them. For somebody who has incontinence very rarely and can do a contraction and can bring the pelvic floor upward and inward already, but just has a problem of endurance, I don't think it's needed to do electrical therapy. Okay? Yeah.
She's thank you.
Oh, okay.
Hearts in there. Anyone else? Alguém mais? A little bit louder, please.
My name is Fatima. I'm pós-graduate in
there's definitely not some problem. In our opinion and experience, can buy feedback remove more adherence when compared to pelvic floor muscle training alone?
Again, that depends on the patient. Like what I was saying before, if the patient doesn't feel they're doing the contraction well, if they're not sure they're doing it well, they will not be self-confident that what they're doing is bringing something, so they might not be so adherent to it. So if a patient has difficulty doing the movement, I think to see it on the feedback will help them be more adherent. We have seen trials, like trials by Carrie Bow in Norway, where the women, they evaluate if they can do the exercise, they can contract properly, then they put them in a class. They don't have the feedback, but they are still adherent, and maybe the class gives them something to help them be more adherent because they are with other people. So adherence with biofeedback, yes, for those who are weak, who don't really understand the movement, who push rather than to contract, but it's not maybe the only thing to improve the adherence. Maybe a group setting might improve if you are stronger, if you are able to contract. Is that answering your question? Yeah.
If you have a patient that urinary incontinence with symptoms, and when you evaluate this patient, you see that we see that it has an overactive pelvic floor.
Mm-hmm.
What you do?
What you do? Well, you treat what is the most important, severe, and also a patient who has an overactive pelvic floor is a patient who has a dysfunction in their pelvic floor. Some people are saying that with patients who have hypertonic pelvic floor or overactive, if it's that what you're meaning,
yes,
you shouldn't do any exercise. My colleague, Mélanie Morin in Montreal, and I have done a randomized trial looking at women with vestibulodynia. And those women with vestibulodynia, they have sometimes incontinence even, they have pain, and they have a pelvic floor that is more toned. And in those women, we did exercise. We teach them how to contract, how to relax. We did some strengthening exercise because what we found was that they have a dysfunction. Because they're tense all day like that, they cannot contract properly when needed, and that might be the cause of their incontinence. So I think what you need to do is identify in your evaluation the dysfunction of the pelvic floor. You need to make sure that the patient understands how to contract, how to relax, and then you have to normalize all the function of the pelvic floor. So I would not be on the side of those who say no exercise at all, because I think we have to normalize the function. And like I said, it has been shown in studies on vestibulodynia that those women with hypertonic pelvic floor also have dysfunction in all the other components. So we need to talk about normalizing. I'm not saying strength. I'm saying normalizing. But I'm not saying nothing at all.
Pelvic
Okay?
muscle function.
Function and all the...
pelvic muscle function.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hypertonicity or overactive? Because in ICS we have the overactive, the normal, and the underactive.
Yeah, that's another story. Yeah, I think it's overactive bladder. And did you look at the last terminology of the ICS, the recent one in 2016? So look at that, because I think there was a big debate around that. But yes, I think the tone is very difficult to define anyway. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Here's another one.
Okay. Okay.
They want to know about the update of research in virtual reality. If you could comment on that,
Well, I'm going to talk about that next week. Virtual reality, it's still pretty new. There's not many trials. Virtual reality rehabilitation, do they mean where the dance thing and things like that, or is it something virtual reality like that?
Yeah, because their group has some studies in virtual reality.
Okay. So you probably know more than me.
No. I mean, I think maybe they follow you.
Okay. I think that it's something new. Right now we have all the application, all the biofeedback linked to your telephone. So we have all those new devices or application that are coming up, and virtual reality is one of them. There is still missing some trials and some evidence around that. So I think it's an area to push. And please, if you're going to do research, go to the chapter and go and look. We have made very nice, we have done a lot of work in that chapter. We have made nice tables with all the details about those new trials. And in the past chapter, we had done the same for trials before. So if you're going to do a trial on virtual reality or on electrical stimulation, please look at what was done, what seemed to work, and go from there rather than to start again.
Yeah, she is meaning about game therapy or
game therapy. I think that's quite interesting because game therapy has a lot of potential for adherence, something that we seem to have difficulty with our patient adherence in the long term because we want them to keep their pelvic floor functional in the long term. So I think if it's ludique, if it's fun, then it will help it in the long term.
Alguém mais? Não? Então a gente vai encerrando. Thank you very much, Chantale.
Thank you.
Obrigada a todos pela presença. Só relembrando que a professora Chantale está aqui como professora visitante com um financiamento FAPESP. E ela está junto ao nosso laboratório, eu como professora Isabel, associada lá da Faculdade de Medicina, Departamento de Fisifono. Ela ainda vai dar um curso de pós-graduação, que todos são convidados, vai ser no Teatro da Faculdade, então ele é bem maior, no dia 8 e 9, que é terça e quarta-feira, das 9 às 10h30 da manhã, e depois no dia 11, lá no campus da cidade universitária, às 2 horas, sexta-feira às 2 horas, uma palestra sobre a Cochrane. E um pouco mais ela vai falar sobre esses níveis de evidência. Muito obrigada pela presença de todos.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great.
Good.
Yes. Yes.